The tush push may get banned. Brock Purdy's gotten paid. We need to update these quarterback rankings. Starting off at the number one spot, it is impossible to put anybody but Josh Allen. If we look at the past 6 seasons now, Josh Allen every year has finished as a top 10 quarterback. If you look at the past 5 seasons, from a points per game perspective, Josh Allen has finished as a top 3 quarterback in every season. And on top of that, the dude over the past 5 years has missed 1 game. So yes, sign me up for this. Looking at the advanced numbers, he's still taking a ton of the rush attempts at the goal line, averaging over half a rushing attempt per game inside the 5-yard line over the past 3 seasons. 8.1 adjusted yards per pass attempt with no Stephon Diggs last year. And of course, he doesn't have a great wide receiver core, but it's not like his wide receiver core was super strong last season. It's pretty much the same exact crew that they're deciding to run it back with. So no hesitation to rank Josh Allen here. If you wanted to take Lamar over him, Lamar probably has a higher ceiling. Like Lamar averaged 25 fantasy points per game this past season, which Josh Allen has never done, right? We've seen the ceiling for Lamar Jackson be higher than the ceiling for Allen. Lamar possibly has better weapons with Flowers and Andrews, but we've also seen a much lower floor with Lamar Jackson. Lamar's gotten injured at a much higher rate than what we've seen from Allen, where Lamar only played 12 games in 2022. He only played 12 games in 2021. Kind of regardless, these are the two quarterbacks being drafted by far and away ahead of the rest of the field. Like if you're on Underdog at the moment, you'll see that they go at the end of round 3, the beginning of round 4. I think they're just fine to take there in Underdog drafts. In your regular redraft league that I know you're not going to be drafting in for a couple months, these guys I would take at the beginning of round 3. These guys I would take at the end of round 2. Because if you're playing in like a regular redraft league where you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, they'll make up such a high percentage of your starting lineup output where you can easily find running back and wide receiver values later that I'm completely fine, quote unquote, overdrafting these guys. Like I may just end up taking one of them in round 3 of the Flock League this year, to be honest with you. But I'm also going to put Daniels and Jaylen Herz in this tier for now. Now this may change. Jaden Daniels, Jaylen Herz may go a tier below this. Hertz may go below Burrow. We'll see what happens with the tush push. But Jaden Daniels is a rookie last season, averages 21 fantasy points per game. Like Jaden Daniels gives you pretty much the typical Lamar Jackson year. As a rookie, Jaden Daniels is only 2 to 3 points behind what you had from Josh Allen. And over on flockfantasy.com, you can actually play around with this yourself, but you can look at the totals based off players. You can look at their game logs. You can look at their career averages, and you can look at all the advanced stats. You can look at yards per route run. You can look at their carries inside the 5-yard line, their snap rates, blah, blah, blah. But looking at Jaden Daniels, if you are taking into account weeks 12 through 17, so the very end of the season when you have the elite Jaden Daniels breakout, he drops 30 points, 27 points, 23 points, 34 points, and 32 points. And you have a 6-game stretch where the lowest finish he has is the QB7 in week 15. So clearly, with rookies, you're going to expect them to continue to get better over time. I understand that, yes, we had a second-year sophomore slump for CJ Stroud, but in reality, that's never guaranteed with any of these rookie players. And you look at the offseason moves the Commanders have made, they have significantly invested into the offensive line. While I'm not a big Debo guy, while I think Debo may be getting drafted in Underdog drafts at the moment, Debo Samuel's definitely a hell of a lot better than them getting targets to Luke McCaffrey this year, whoever else would have been playing that role. Maybe Ben Sinnott takes a little bit of a step forward. If not, you have Zach Ertz. Daniels had 52 rushing yards per game this past season, which is right in line with what you have from Lamar Jackson. And obviously the efficiency was phenomenal for a rookie. Now I have Jaylen Herz in the same tier. Now the reason I have Hertz in the same tier for now, which this may change because we got news today that the league's about to vote to ban the tush push. And if that happens, it may change this where Hertz may fall behind Burrow. Jaylen Herz 1.1 carries inside the 5-yard line this past season. 0.9 the year prior, 1.3 the year before that. So 3 straight seasons for Jaylen Herz of finishing as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy. 4 straight seasons for Jaylen Herz averaging 20 or more points per game. He is still getting the rushing touchdowns at the goal line. He is still giving you a tremendous amount of rushing upside. Now, realistically, I still think Jaylen Herz would be an elite fantasy quarterback without the tush push. But my concern is where it's almost a 50-50 if they get inside the 5-yard line, if it's going to be a Barkley carry or if it's going to be a Jaylen Herz carry based off the data from last season. If you get rid of that tush push, does that change to, oh, Barkley sees 75%, Barkley sees 80% of those carries inside the 5-yard line? Where if that happens, it significantly raises the overall ceiling that you get from a Barkley perspective with rushing touchdowns, while it may bring down Jaylen Hurts' ceiling just a tad bit. So that is going to be something to be on the lookout for. Jaylen Hurts also with the Eagles will have a much tougher schedule where maybe they're trailing games. Maybe they have to throw the ball a little bit more this season in comparison to what they did last year. But all these quarterbacks are elite. All these guys would be players that if you draft them in underdog drafts today, you're only taking one more quarterback at the end of the draft. If you draft them in your regular redraft league, you take them and you never even consider drafting a second guy. But of course, you're not going to be drafting in your regular redraft league for a while. If you wanted to hop in a draft today, I'm streaming drafts every single night on the channel on Underdog Fantasy. Y'all have heard me talking about it for years because in my mind, it's by far and away the best thing you can be doing in May, June, July to be having some fun and preparing for your fantasy football draft. They're best ball, so it's no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every offseason. That's how I won a decent amount of money on Underdog back in the day. And you can find a link to draft with us on Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you will get a 50% deposit bonus. And you'll also be getting our free 2025 fantasy football rankings and draft guide cheat sheet when that launches this summer to prepare you for your main fantasy football draft. Underdog's available in damn near every state. And again, you can find that link in the description and comment section. Use code FLOCK for all those perks. Going down to a quarterback that's in his own tier, we're going to be looking at Joe Burrow as QB5. So Burrow, absolute nuclear season this past year, where the man averaged 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, where the man averaged about 290 passing yards per game, both career highs for Joe Burrow. The efficiency wasn't phenomenal, but hell, he was throwing the ball 40 times a game. So of course, maybe the adjusted yards per pass attempt's not going to be at the very top of the league. Now, the reason I'm not going to have Burrow inside this top tier is the most common fantasy football format that the people watching this video are going to be playing in, as well as the people drafting on Underdog, right? Underdog is a 4-point passing touchdown league, and your fantasy football league's probably the same. So in those 4-point passing touchdown formats, where Burrow's best season ever, he averaged 15 rushing yards per game. Burrow's best season ever, he averaged 1 rushing touchdown every 3 to 4 games. It's going to be very difficult for him to compete with the Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jaylen Herz, Josh Allen guys that are rushing for 50 yards in a rushing touchdown every other contest. Because if you're looking at those rushing statistics, like going back and looking at Jaylen Herz, who averaged 0.9 rushing touchdowns a game and 42 rushing yards a game, let's just do the quick math here. That is 9.6 fantasy points per game from Jaylen Herz just on the ground. We convert that to passing yards. That's, you add on an additional 240 passing yards to Jaylen Herz every week based off what he does on the ground. So Burrow can't be in the same tier as those other guys in a 4-point passing touchdown format. 6-point passing touchdown league, he can bridge the gap, which is honestly why leagues that I start going forward, I may try to make them a 6-point passing touchdown format. Like, honestly, I may ask the other guys in the Flock League this year if they're fine with the 6-point passing TD format, because then Burrow, if he leads the NFL in passing touchdowns and passing yards, could reasonably be at the very top in fantasy as well, where he just can't in a regular league. Now, going down to tier 3, we're going to look at Patrick Mahomes. Now, yes, I get it. Mahomes, he was bad last year. Yes, I get it. Mahomes was bad 2 years ago. 17.5 fantasy points per game, both seasons. Mahomes both years averaged fewer than 2 passing touchdowns per game. Mahomes this past year sees a career low 245 passing yards a game. The efficiency was bad, 6.4 adjusted yards per pass. Nothing about Mahomes' statistical season last year or his fantasy season last year was inspiring to say the least. But going into this next season, you have Xavier Worthy stepping into year 2. You potentially have a healthy Hollywood Brown, potentially a healthy and unsuspended Rashee Rice. So this may be the best group of weapons Patrick Mahomes has had in quite some time. And we go back and you look at the ceiling that we've seen from Patrick Mahomes in fantasy. Mahomes has a year where he averaged 26 fantasy points per game. Has Joe Burrow ever come close to that? Nope. Burrow's best season ever was at 21. Has Jaylen Herz ever had 26 fantasy points per game? Nope. Has Jaden Daniels? Nope. Has Lamar Jackson? Yes. Lamar back in 2019 at 27. Has Josh Allen? No. So the only quarterback we've ever seen have the same type of ceiling as Patrick Mahomes is Lamar Jackson. Now, the question is, do they continue to just win football games by playing great defense, running the ball, and winning them at the end? Or do we begin to get to see Patrick Mahomes go back to 300 passing yards a game? Get to see Patrick Mahomes go back to 3 passing touchdowns a game? I don't think it's the most likely scenario, which is why Mahomes is in tier 3 for me, but it's still in the range of outcomes, which is why I do think that he has to be a tier ahead of maybe some of those promising young upside guys like Caleb and Nix we'll talk about in a second. Now, going over and looking at Baker Mayfield posts the best season of his NFL career, and it's not even close this past year. He was the quarterback 4 in points per game. He averaged 21.5 points per contest, 7.5 adjusted yards per pass attempt, 264.5 passing yards a game, and he actually ran the ball a bit. He had 22 rushing yards per game. That's not too bad. Now, another big thing that I want to talk about is while, yes, Chris Godwin's going to be injured coming into this next season, realistically, if we go through and if we look at how many games that you actually got from Godwin this past year, I mean, Godwin, while he was elite at the beginning of the season, he goes down in week 7. So you only got 6 full games from Chris Godwin this past year for Baker Mayfield. On top of this, if y'all remember, Mike Evans gets injured this past season as well, where at one point, Baker Mayfield's having to freaking rely on Jalen McMillan, Cade Otton as his top weapons. We're going into this next season, Mike Evans is healthy. Hopefully, Chris Godwin gives us more than 6 games. I've been drafting a decent amount of Godwin, so if he doesn't, your boy may be screwed. And you take one of the best wide receivers in the NFL draft with Igbuka in round 1, where there's no scenario this next season where Jalen McMillan's having to be relied upon as the top target, where Cade Otton's getting 10 plus targets in a game just because Baker Mayfield has nowhere else to go with the ball. So Baker gave you the crazy season last year. His weapons may be even better this next season. But obviously, it was his 7th NFL season and his first time averaging 20 fantasy points per game. So we don't have the large sample that we do with the Mahomes. To be completely honest with you, if we are just going raw fantasy points, I may take Kyler in a 4-point passing touchdown format, because we go over and look at Kyler every season of his NFL career. He's had 30 or more rushing yards. Every season of his NFL career, Kyler Murray has also had at least 1 rushing touchdown every 3 weeks. Every season of his NFL career, he's averaged 17 fantasy points. Every season of his NFL career, he has been the QB 12 or better from a points per game perspective. So Kyler Murray is giving you a great floor. The ceiling that he set back in 2020, back in 2021, where he gave you a top 5 finish and a top 3 finish, we haven't seen that as of late. Obviously, he gets injured in 2022. In 2023, he's working himself back from that. And this past season, it was maybe the most disappointing year of his NFL career with only 6.6 adjusted yards per pass attempt. I think Kyler is much lower on this list if you're ranking NFL quarterbacks from a talent perspective compared to a fantasy football perspective. Him giving you the rushing is going to be a big deal here. But you have Marvin going into year 2. McBride cements himself as a top option. The depth with the weapons is maybe going to be a little bit questionable with Arizona. But if Harrison could take a massive step forward in year 2, Kyler does have the floor as a QB1 and maybe the ceiling as a mid to high end QB1. Now, going over and looking at our next 2 quarterbacks, Caleb and Bo Nix are super exciting. Bo Nix was the much better quarterback in fantasy this past season. Bo Nix was the QB8. And again, if you look at the course of his entire season, Bo Nix really broke out at the end of the year. Now, with that being said, if we look at how these 2 quarterbacks had their situation change from last season to this season, there's not a single player in the NFL that has had a supporting cast improvement as much as Caleb Williams. It doesn't matter if you look at any of the 3 things that are going to lead to quarterback success. If you look at the coaching staff, Caleb Williams has a significant upgrade in 2025 in comparison to 2024. If you look at the offensive line, Caleb Williams is going to be working behind a much improved unit in 2025 in comparison to 2024. If you look at his weapons, well, yes, you lose Keenan Allen, you add in Luther Burden and a tight end they decided to take inside the top 10 picks of the NFL draft. So Caleb has better weapons, a better coaching staff, and a better offensive line than he had last season. And Caleb last year wasn't that bad. He had 3 times the amount of touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He gave you a decent amount of rushing upside. He gave you 28 rushing yards per game. The big issue that you had with Caleb Williams last season from a fantasy perspective is the rushing touchdowns were non-existent. 0 rushing TDs, 0 carries inside the 5-yard line. But what would help Caleb a ton is if this coaching staff went, okay, we're at the goal line. Maybe we give Caleb some read options. Maybe Caleb can actually tuck the ball and run it across the edge himself, which if we can get 6, 7 rushing touchdowns from Caleb Williams this next season with the new coaching staff, that would be absolutely massive. And let me just pull this up real quick, but Caleb Williams in college, he didn't have a ton of rushing yards, but he had a decent amount of rushing TDs. So it's not like there's a reason to believe that he can't do this. Like looking at Caleb Williams at USC, he had 11 touchdowns as a junior and 10 touchdowns as a sophomore just running it. So I'm going to go Caleb over Bo Nix, not to take anything away from Bo Nix. Bo Nix was the QB8 last season. Bo Nix posted 6.5 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Bo Nix also had a decent amount of rushing, 25 rushing yards per game. I just don't think his situation improved nearly as much as Caleb Williams did. And keep in mind, Caleb was the consensus pick over Bo Nix in the NFL draft last season. So if the priors where Caleb was a better quarterback, I think we're going to stick with Caleb now that I think he's in the better situation, to be honest. Now, let's drop this down a tier. Let's go over to Brock Purdy, the man who gets paid, the man who does have the very disappointing season last year. We have the best year that we've seen from him as a rusher, where he averages about 21.5 rushing yards per contest. He does get about half a carry per game inside the 5-yard line. But yeah, the significant efficiency drop. Falls from 9.3 adjusted yards per pass attempt down to 7.7. But if we are looking at the weapons and the supporting cast for Brock Purdy, it was a massive difference from 2023 to 2024. Brock Purdy in 2023, his top targets, we're not going to look at receiving yards, we're not going to look at receptions, let's just look at targets, who he's throwing the ball to. Brandon Ayuk, number 1, out for the season. George Kittle, number 2. Deebo Samuel, number 3, fat. Number 4, Christian McCaffrey, out for the season. So 2 of his top 4 weapons from 2023, out for the year. One of them falls off the face of the planet, pulls a James Harden. So it is understandable to see the fall off from 18.5 fantasy points per game down to 17.5. Now, I still streamed Brock Purdy last year in the Flock League. Last year, I mean, hell, I was flying loose with my quarterback situation. One week I was picking up Caleb. The next week I was picking up Purdy. Purdy still managed to be the quarterback 10. Purdy still gave you some usable weeks, despite having the very poor supporting cast. So if you get Brandon Ayuk back in, you get Ricky Pearsall in year 2 fully healthy. You get McCaffrey fully healthy as well. And if you look at the Niners schedule is beautiful this next season. Purdy may be a much better option this year than he was last. Going over and looking at Jared Goff. Goff is an interesting case where you do just have a severely capped ceiling. Like Goff since 2016, we have never seen him average 20 points per game or more. Like I would say Goff and almost all these quarterbacks beyond this. Like maybe Fields is a little bit of a different example. Goff's going to give you a very high floor, but a very low ceiling just because he'll never run the ball. Maybe you have a concern with Ben Johnson leaving Detroit, but you kind of know what you're getting with Goff. Justin Fields, you don't. Justin Fields, no idea whatsoever. We had 3 years ago, massive upside in terms of just the raw amount of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns that he's giving you as a Chicago Bear. I actually streamed him early in the year when he was the starting quarterback for Pittsburgh. As soon as he was the starter in Pittsburgh, I went, oh my God, this dude's going to be a league winner. Just thinking the rushing upside that he showed in Chicago, all of a sudden a better supporting cast in Pittsburgh with a much better coaching staff. I didn't run the ball nearly as much. Like, I started him for maybe 1, maybe 2 weeks and then immediately dropped him. But if Fields gets back to running the way that he was in Chicago, in New York, he has a ceiling that clears anything else in this tier. Clears Purdy, clears Goff, clears Dak. But also, from a passing volume perspective, he's going to be much, much lower, and the floor is way, way lower. So I'm making these rankings full transparency for myself with Underdog drafts at the moment. That's what I'm doing every single night. Obviously, with our draft guides that we're going to be putting out for everybody on the site, and both for all the people who use code FLOCK on Underdog this year, I'm going to have this broken down to, like, if you're playing on an ESPN league, a Yahoo league, a sleeper league, you're going to have a different draft guide cheat sheet for every single one. And if you're in like your regular league where you have access to the waiver wire and you're down in this tier where you're just kind of streaming quarterbacks anyway, I'd probably rather have Fields over Purdy, Goff, Dak, just because I think the ceiling is so much higher. But in best ball where you can't stream that way, like, the pocket passing options just have a much higher floor. Like, we go ahead and you look at Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, yes, this past season, very bad even before he gets injured. He's the quarterback 22 from a points per game perspective, worst mark of his NFL career. He gives you 6 adjusted yards per pass attempt, the worst mark of his NFL career. But Dak's not that old. The dude's going to be 32 years old this season. We actually go through and look at what he's given you every other year in his NFL career. He's been a top 12 quarterback in fantasy from a points per game perspective every single season. So I think the floor with Dak Prescott's incredibly high. And to be honest with you, I think that you have a strong reason with Dak fully healthy, with Pickens in, with Lamb in this offense, to maybe go ahead and move Dak Prescott to the very top of this tier. But that's why we're doing this as tier list, right? You can interchange these guys in almost any way you want. Now, from here and beyond, if you're in your regular redraft league, these are all waiver wire streamers. You can draft 2 of these guys at the end of your draft if you miss out on the elite level names. Now, of course, if you're drafting on Underdog, you're going to have to draft all these players. You're going to have to figure it out, right? I think it is a massive, massive tier. I think it is up to you, so we can almost rapid fire this. Looking at Justin Herbert, significant fall off with the coaching staff in terms of the passing volume. The efficiency goes up dramatically, 7.7 adjusted yards per pass attempt, the best mark in his NFL career. However, you only have 29 passing attempts per game. They are not throwing the ball in Los Angeles. Maybe that gets better with Ladd McConkey in year 2, Trey Harris coming in, Quentin Johnston in year 3. But as of now, it's a rush first offense. Going over and looking at Drake May, he showed a ton of promise. I know a lot of people absolutely love him, especially on the site. You listen to the FSC guys, they're all about May. He showed a lot of rushing upside year 1, which is exciting. But my thing is, I think the Patriots did a very bad job building the supporting cast around him this next season. I think that he is going to be set up in a way where if you're having to rely on Kyle Williams as your second wide receiver, a 31, 32-year-old receiver and Stephon Diggs coming off a torn ACL as your number 1 guy, I don't love it. Like, think about like the Texans last year. The Texans went into the season with Stephon Diggs fully healthy as their wide receiver 3. And now, like, the Patriots are asking Diggs off a torn ACL another year older to be their wide receiver 1. I'm going over to Jordan Love. Jordan Love, same issue that you have with Herbert. The dude averaged 28 passing attempts per game last season. Now, it was super efficient. He looked good while doing so. The Packers look good running the ball, but if they're going to run the ball, they may not be startable. Going over to CJ Stroud, massive fall off from year 1 to year 2. He was the QB9 in fantasy year 1, 8.1 adjusted yards per pass attempt. This fell down to the QB27, 6.1 adjusted yards per pass attempt the following season. Now, looking at that with Stroud, maybe give him the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, okay, well, now he has better wide receivers. Last year, everybody got injured, but also he may have a worse offensive line this next season. Going over, looking at our next guy, Trevor Lawrence gets Travis Hunter coming in. I know a lot of people are clowning on Hunter at training camp, blah, blah, blah. I think Hunter's going to be a good wide receiver for Lawrence. I think he'll be a great player for the Jags. But looking at Lawrence, he was like a viable streamer back in 2022 when he finishes as QB9. But outside of that, Lawrence has never been a player that you wanted to pick up and start in fantasy. This past season, QB23 in points per game. The year prior, QB16. His rookie season, the QB29. Adjusted yards per pass attempt, 4.97, 6.3, 6.5. Maybe the change with coaching staff helps Lawrence. I know a lot of people are expecting that to be the case. Maybe Travis Hunter coming over helps Lawrence dramatically. But the baseline expectations are Lawrence has been very bad for a very long time, and he's never really been startable in fantasy. That may be the case this next year. McCarthy, total black box. No idea. Y'all know I always say with rookie quarterbacks coming in, which we'll talk about with Cam Ward in just a second, I have no idea how to evaluate these guys. You have no idea how to evaluate these guys. Don't listen to anybody on YouTube that tells you, oh, I'm a quarterback guru scout. I think the most reasonable thing to do as fantasy football players is we look at the NFL draft capital that player received. We look at the rushing upside of that player coming over from college. We look at the situation that they're stepping into. McCarthy, good enough draft capital where we know he's the starter this next year. McCarthy, great situation. That's why he's over Penix. That's why he's over Tua for me. He's going to a team with Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, and a great coaching staff that just made Sam Darnold relevant. So I'm pumped on McCarthy. If he had more rushing upside, hell, I'd be completely fine you throwing him up at the very top of this tier at QB 15, even though we really haven't seen him. I'm going over and looking at Michael Penix. I know we saw Michael Penix at the very end of the season. I know against Carolina in a meaningless game in week 18, the man posts 8.1 adjusted yards per pass attempt, over 300 passing yards, multiple passing touchdowns. You got the Drake London blow up. In reality, I almost view Michael Penix as the exact same thing with McCarthy. I think McCarthy has a better situation he's going into this next season with, in my opinion, a better coaching staff, which is why I'm going to give McCarthy the slight bump. But in reality, we don't know. And then going over and looking at Tua. With Tua, he had one really solid season back in 2022 when he was startable in fantasy, where he finishes the QB 8. But outside of that, we really haven't had any usable year from Tua. We've had some efficient seasons, but he's not startable in fantasy in a 4-point passing touchdown league, while at the same time, obviously one hit and his season's over. Now let's move over to our next tier. And again, in your regular redraft league, do not draft any of these guys. These are going to be players that you sit on the waiver wire. If they have a good 3-week stretch, pick them up and maybe stream them. But in underdog drafts, you kind of have to. Cam Ward, who knows? We'll see. I don't think he has a great situation. Not nearly as good enough of a situation to compare him to somebody like J.J. McCarthy and put him in the same tier. Matthew Stafford, great real-life quarterback, just not a good fantasy option. Over the past 3 seasons, his best mark's been 16 points per game. Issue is he's not going to run the ball at all, and he's not going to have as much volume as those guys like Jared Goff. Geno Smith, really not going to run the ball much at all. He gets 16 rushing yards per game this past season. And looking at the situation he's going to with the Raiders, seems like it's going to be a rush-first offense. Going over and looking at Anthony Richardson, he may not start week 1. Like if Anthony Richardson starts week 1, whenever I make that draft guide cheat sheet for you to print out and to take to your real fantasy football draft, I'm going to have Anthony Richardson way higher in these rankings. Because again, like starting at QB 23 for sure, but even maybe up to QB 15, they're all streamers. So if Anthony Richardson's starting, this dude, you may be able to put in your starting lineup. He averaged 45.5 rushing yards per game last season. And keep in mind, some of those games, he didn't even play the full game because he was not good enough. So if he's playing an entire game, he's probably usable in fantasy just because you kind of get running back points with him. And then obviously a little sprinkle of passing volume. But like if you have to draft an underdog best ball team at the moment, it's just so scary because the dude may not be the starter week 1. It may be Daniel Jones. Then our next 2 quarterbacks will be Sam Darnold as well as Jackson Dart. Obviously, you would never look at any of these quarterbacks in your regular fantasy leagues. Darnold, however, for underdog drafts, hell, you know he's probably going to start all 17 weeks. So as a quarterback 3, maybe is interesting to help you advance in round 17, 16. And then Jackson Dart, same thing, only an underdog fantasy pick where if you think that he can come in and provide some upside when you're looking at a scenario in which I don't know, that Giants have a horrible schedule. Russ is probably going to get benched near the beginning of the season. Dart could run the ball a little bit, but I don't think he's going to be like a Josh Allen level rusher, of course. I think he's interesting in week 17, but I think that's all I got for you. I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And again, if you want to draft today, you can do so on Underdog Fantasy. They're best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft teams every single day. And that's how I've done it for years. But But you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, you will get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to be getting my 2025 fantasy football rankings and draft guide cheat sheets. And last but not least, Underdog is available in damn near every single state. But thank you. I really do appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen. And I really hope we can see you out with the live stream later tonight.